Welcome again, everybody, to Stepping Into What's Next. So, for today, what we're going to do is look at what it means to tend to and care for the soul. We're going to look specifically at the story of Abram and Sarai and their charge to go out into the land of Canaan and settle there. So let me start though, given that the spiritual topic for today is really what it means to tend to soul in liminal space. Let me ask a kind of big question here as a way into our conversation. What would you describe the soul as? How would you describe what the soul is?
I would say it's my authentic self. Coming, showing my authentic self. I feel that's my soul.
Yeah, that's great, Joy. Thank you. Thank you for that. Anyone else want to add on to that?
I always felt my soul as my spirit. Pastor Tonette.
Yeah. Something that lives inside of you. It's sort of like the spirit that is within you, kind of a thing, Fran.
As well as exterior as well as my persona.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I would like to add that I see my soul as a reflection. So whenever I think about, I'm going to look for my soul, I can't find it. But I've trained, I guess, I've come to expect the reflection of things that I see, feelings that I have are generating from that soul that I can't find.
Interesting. So the soul is sort of this thing that animates your experience of the world or shapes your experience of the world, even if you can't find it, point to it, that kind of a thing. Is that right, Carl?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'd like to say that I think it's when you quiet the mind, it's a place within you that it's like this energetic feeling of being alive. And it's it's more subtle. So it is harder to access.
Yeah. Thanks for that. You're within. There's a sense of feeling that comes with it. There's a subtlety to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Julie, I think I saw your hand up.
Yeah, all of these things really resonate with me, and I would add to it what makes it so mysterious is that for me, it feels like it's immeasurable in that I don't know when it started or what it will continue through, that there's something about the soul that is goes beyond even life. And so it just feels immeasurable, uncontainable, but incredibly experiential in the ways that they're described.
Yeah, thanks for that, Julia. Though, as you were saying that, the word mystery came to mind. That the soul is mysterious in a way. Is that?
Absolutely, and uncontrollable in that way too.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else want to add another layer to this really rich, beautiful description of what the soul is? Well, let's read a little bit about what some other folks have said about what the soul is. So, according to Cynthia Bourgeot, who is a spiritual teacher, that's not what I wanted you to see. I don't think. Oh. Are y'all seeing my screen share?
No.
Just words.
Just words. Okay. try this again. How about
So
that?
Stephen Coleman has started screen sharing. Oh, there we go.
There it
All
is.
right, cool. Okay, so Cynthia Bourgeot is a Christian teacher and kind of spiritual director, and she has written. This is paraphrased by Susan Beaumont, whom I'll talk about in just a little bit. The deepest source of our true and authentic self, the very first thing that we in this group talked about. The soul is the agent of divine guidance, the eternal principle present when we came into life. The voice of soul has an intuitive sense of integrity, coherence, and elegance. It responds to beauty and to wonder. The Quaker teacher and spiritual activist Parker Palmer has this to say about the soul. We can name some of the functions of the soul without presuming to penetrate its mystery. Again, picking up on some of the things that we in this group have already said. The soul wants to keep us rooted in the ground of our own being, resisting the tendency of other faculties, like the intellect and ego, to uproot us from who we are. The soul wants to keep us connected to the community in which we find life, for it understands that relationships are necessary if we are to thrive. The soul wants to tell us the truth about ourselves, our world, and the relation between the two, whether that truth is easy or hard to hear. The soul wants to give us life and wants us to pass that gift along, to become life givers in a world that deals too much with death. And then finally, from the poet Mary Oliver, this is an excerpt from her poem Maybe. Nobody knows what the soul is. It comes and goes like the wind over the water. Sometimes for days you don't think of it. We'll pause here for a minute. What do you think about those descriptions of the soul? How do they resonate or not with you?
I like the last one, Pastor Tony. I like that one.
That Mary Oliver excerpt?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. Do
yeah.
we really know what it is?
Right. And in that second one from Parker Palmer, he describes it's a mystery. We can't name what it is, but we can talk about some of the ways that it acts in the world. But it's true. Mary Oliver says it really succinctly. No mystery there being a poet. Nobody knows what the soul is. And sometimes for days, you don't think about it. Can anyone relate to that? Yeah.
Mhm.
We don't really
Mhm.
live in a culture that so much asks us, well, what's your soul feeling right now? What's your soul craving? How's your soul's health? These aren't really questions we ask each other so much as a culture. I'm wondering though, does anyone feel comfortable naming some of the ways in which, or some of the reasons why they don't think about their soul?
Tony, it
Yeah.
seems to me like uh, it's a word that's been used so much it's kind of lost any meaning
Mm,
that it had. For me, when you just read that last piece, I was thinking, that's awareness.
Mm.
I mean, that's what awareness does. You don't know where it comes from or anything. If you're quiet enough and listen enough. So, but I think the word soul just for me and the word God for me just has lost its meaning in the sense of it's just been so overused and used in so many different ways.
mhm. So there are other words that you find that you resonate with a little bit more, and so maybe part of the reason why we don't think about soul so much is because it's become cliched or sort of a platitude that we just talk about, um, or not in some cases. It's just kind of been overdone.
I
Or
think people I think people who think they can control everything, they're very controlling, don't even think of their soul
Yeah.
because they want to make things happen and they think they can control everything.
Thanks for that, Joy. So this sense that maybe there's something that's a little bit in tension with our desire for control and also an awareness of our soul's needs. Maybe those things can't really live side by side particularly well.
Pastor,
Did she
I'm
say that
drawn.
it,
I'm sorry.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Sherry.
Did she say that it comes and goes?
She did. She says it comes and goes like the wind over the water. And
Mm-hmm.
whether that means our souls leave our bodies and come back or what have you, maybe she means that. I think maybe it's more of a kind of an awareness of our souls because she says sometimes for days you don't think of it. Yeah. Fran-
When I think of the soul, Pastor Tony, I think of what we have gone back and say and describe music. They said soul music. What does soul music mean?
mm,
Does it mean that this music has affected you? That it is how can I say it's affected you so that you can feel it in your bones or you can feel it in your heart. You know, that's what that was always confusing to me when someone said, "Oh, that's soul music." Well, I could listen to jazz and it'd be soulful, or
mm.
even gospel soulful because it touched that what we don't know, that mystery. How did this move me? You know.
Yeah, that's a really helpful point to bring out, Fran. The ways that we incorporate the word soul into everyday language. Thinking about
Mm-hmm.
soul music, thinking about somebody who has a lot of soul,
Oh,
old soul. That word
yeah.
is kind of everywhere, actually, in a way. And it's kind of one of those concepts, a little bit to John's point, maybe, that we talk about a lot without any real definite description of, but we all
Bingo.
maybe think we know what we're saying when we point to
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah.
So, what we're going to do today in terms of our scripture is be looking at the question of what it means to care for and tend to the soul in a liminal time. And so, for the scripture reading, we're actually going to look again at Abram and Sarai and their mandate and the beginnings of their journey to find and settle in the land of Canaan. Little background before we get there, though. This is in Genesis chapter 12 that we'll read from. In the prior 12 chapters, what has happened, the prior 11 chapters, what has happened, of course, is the beginning of the universe where God created everything and created Adam and Eve. They ate the fruit, they got kicked out of Eden, they have children, Cain and Abel. Cain gets jealous, kills Abel. Then their offspring, or Cain's offspring, and then Adam and Eve's third child, Seth, their offspring populate the earth. God looks at this population of people and determines that they are irredeemably corrupt. And so God decides that God's going to wash all of them away, literally. However, God deems Noah and Noah's family as the only worthy human beings. And so they are charged to build an ark and populate it with not only their family, but all of the animals and insects of the earth. And then God washes everyone away. Noah and his family see the waters recede. And then God makes a promise. God says, I will never again destroy the entire earth with a flood. And here's a symbol of that covenant, a rainbow. So every time we see a rainbow, we are invited to remember that God will never again flood the entire earth. Then, after that, human beings spoke a single language and were united in well-ordered purpose, and they build the Tower of Babel. And God sees this, and God decides to scatter everybody. And so that everyone starts speaking different languages and has different cultures in different parts of the earth. Meanwhile, Abram, who is a descendant of Noah's son Shem, finds himself in a town called Haran. Now, here we are. In that town, Abram receives a message from God. One more note, if that name Abram sounds weird to you, and you don't know who I'm talking about, this person later becomes Abraham.
Abraham.
Yes, and his wife Sarai eventually becomes Sarah. This is before that moment, though, right at the beginning of their story with God. So let's read together this excerpt from Genesis. Are y'all seeing that?
Yes.
All right, now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot, and all the possessions that they had gathered, and all the persons whom they had acquired in Haran, and they set forth to go to the land of Canaan. When they had come to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord, who had appeared to him. From there he moved on to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and invoked the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on by stages towards the Negeb. Okay. First 9 verses in the 12th chapter of Genesis. What sticks out to you?
Promise.
You say promise, Carl?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And
Promise, and what was that? I'm sorry.
obedience.
Promise and obedience. Yeah. Yeah. This is a big promise. And a big command, in fact. Yeah. Abram's and his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot are to go into this foreign land and populate it with their people. But as it happens, there are actually already people there.
Mhm.
Okay.
Hey, I was just trying to check on. Yes, ma'am.
What else sticks out to y'all? Well, let me ask it this way. We're talking about liminality. We're talking about this reality of being in in-between places. Um, I mean, the ways that liminality shows up here are pretty clear. Abram leaving a place that he was familiar with, that he had spent the first 75 years of his life in, and he's told to go to this other place. what do you notice that he does though at every single step along the way? Did you catch that?
He builds an altar.
He builds altars. Yeah,
Mhm.
right. And he builds altars to the Lord, and he invokes God's name, and he performs maybe a sacrifice, maybe he burns incense, we don't know, but he takes time to stop and celebrate or observe or practice piety, however you would phrase it. And so one way we can describe what's happening here is that what Abram does is he tends his soul along the way. He participates in this cultural practice. He takes time to stop and reconnect with the God that he feels as though has charged him with this mission. Um, Now, was that the most efficient way to go about it? Kind of going back to that question or that point that Joy made about control and how that sometimes gets in the way of us connecting with our souls. I would argue that sometimes efficiency and the desire to be effective or to get through it can sometimes also be a distraction from doing the work that our souls require, that our souls need from us, which is attention, which is awareness. Abram chooses a different way, and he actually takes time at every step to make these altars and to connect with God.
Yeah, when you were talking earlier, I was thinking, what separates us is our busyness of life and how modern life provides us with many distractions and just getting through life. But I have a feeling it was a lot harder for Abram to get through life. I mean, he didn't have a refrigerator or dishwasher. But we probably generally spend less time on our souls than he did.
It's a really good point, Carla. He didn't have a cell phone. He didn't have social media. He didn't have TV. He didn't have a whole variety of things um, that can take us away from ourselves, from our surroundings, from maybe even sometimes what we really want to do, but maybe we don't feel like we have the energy or the attention to really do it. That kind of care work. We can go a little bit deeper to some of this to life because unless you are very familiar with geography, particularly the names of cities and places in ancient Mesopotamia, you may have been a little bit confused by where all this is. So here's a map that folks have created to kind of give a little bit of visualization about what this journey for Abram might have looked like, for Abram, Sarai, and Lot might have looked like. And so there's a question of where is, you are. That is where Abram was. And that's where he and his family spent a great deal of their time together before Abram left, before they went to Haran. And so, was it this here in modern day Iraq, or was it this up here? Not exactly sure. Tradition holds, and you can see here the traditional route is the solid red line, the alternate route, based on some archaeological evidence, but again, there's no real certainty about it. This is an alternative route that some folks have put together. Following the traditional route, then, he went from to Haran, and then came down through modern day Syria, and then actually went through Canaan, and eventually they land in Egypt. And that picks up a whole other leg of this story. And part of the reason, if you remember from the passage in Genesis, they do that is because there's already people in Canaan. And so Abram decides that they need to keep moving on to figure out what they're going to do. A drought comes. We learn later on in the story, and that pushes them to go to a more fertile place, which is Egypt in this time. So here's a little bit of a visualization, and at these different markers, then, according to the story, Abram built these altars. If y'all would describe an altar, what is that? How would you describe what an altar is? What's in your mind as we're having this conversation?
Well, it has some elevation, made out of stone, something permanent.
Yeah,
A
yeah,
flat
something
surface.
elevated. I mean, a flat surface is involved.
Mhm.
Yeah, maybe made out of stone. Okay. That certainly would have been the case in Abram's time. What other images of altars do you all have?
I think they're called cairns. You know, when you're hiking, you find these altars along the way. I can't think of what they called cairns, and it's rocks built up to a certain height. And as people go hiking, they add a rock or a stone to it. That's what I picture it to look. Is that what it's called? A cairn? Yeah, John, Karen,
Yes, yes, that's what it's called, I believe. And
right?
we had some neighbors across the street, their small children built a cairn on our mailbox. So out of pieces of the road that had chipped off, it was great.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I picture it as.
So sort of a mound of stones. Yeah. Okay, that's great.
And I think that they hold symbols that, you know, that reflect to something, you know, spiritual. So that it takes you to another place. It's a transcendent place. It's physical, but it takes you to a non-physical place.
Yeah, so there's yeah, the symbols and the imagery can enable and activate a kind of experience of transcendence, maybe.
Mhm.
You know, oh, you're
Yeah,
muted. Going back to this notion of attending to our soul in nature, when we were out last summer on a very long road trip, we went to a place called Cathedral Rock in Sedona, Arizona. Amazing structure and nature. And I was thinking about all the cathedral rocks, all the rocks I have seen that have been named cathedrals. And it kind of shook me when I realized that that we weren't naming these rocks after our cathedrals. We were building our cathedrals after these rocks. That is, these rocks were there first and inspired us, and then we tried to build things that looked like or felt like those rock formations in nature that had inspired us. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about these altars as a maybe a little bit lame attempt to create something that nature gives us that evokes a sense of awe.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Marcia. Thank you for that. And it's picking up on some of the themes of what our conversation has already provoked, naming that sense of awe, transcendence, a feeling. One of the first things we said about the soul is that it's about feeling. This mysterious place that shapes the way we experience the world or what we feel about it. Yeah, Fran.
Um, Once a month, I go to my hairdresser, and she has an altar, but these altars are to her deceased parents, and she burns candles, incense, and she also have their favorite things. Her father was a cigar smoker. Her mother liked Hershey bars, or she have her mother's perfume or whatever. And that was my first time seeing someone actually having an altar for their deceased parents or someone, who was dead. And it was wonderful.
That's beautiful, Fran. Yeah. The practice of building altars is obviously ancient, right?
Mhm.
Human cultures and religions all over the world have done some form of this since really ever. And people have continued with that practice in a whole variety of ways. Oh, I think, John, are you showing us an altar?
Yeah.
You're muted right now, but that's beautiful. Oh,
That's my wife's. We did this for Father's Day. My wife's father, and that's my wife in the picture with him. And this was my father. And every Father's Day, we put a little altar up there. And for their deceased dates throughout the year, we put another altar with their pictures. And we got the idea from, excuse me, let me see if I can turn this around. Yeah. We got the idea from watching Korean dramas because they do that over there, and they have a whole meal out in front of these things of the food that the person liked. So unfortunately for me, I have no idea what my father liked because he passed away way too soon for me to really pay attention to that, etc. So we just put up flowers, and it's really nice to just walk by it and see it. And I was thinking, what if each of us went out and started putting together an altar in our backyard, for example? What part of us would that altar represent? So we just wouldn't slab together some rocks and stuff if we wanted to have any meaning at all. And the meaning to me would, I don't know how we would get it, but what part of it would it represent for us individually? What meaning? What anything?
yeah.
And I think Abram, is that right? Abram left those. I can just see steadfastness for one thing. I mean, if you're going on a journey like that, and you need to be focused and aware of why you're doing this journey, then placing altars along his route, I mean, that's a main part of him, it would seem. So then I thought about, well, what if I went out and built an altar? What would it mean? And I'd have to think about that a while. I couldn't just go out and start slapping sticks together.
Well, it's what you've done though. What you just showed us. Thank you, by the way, for bringing us into that lovely space that y'all have created. Is care for your souls in a moment of liminality, which in so many ways is what grief is. You still feel this connection with a person who's no longer physically present with you. So you're in this in between space. And creating an altar is one way to contain that experience and celebrate that person's life and celebrate your love for them so you can tend to your soul in the midst of that kind of liminal space. Yeah, it's powerful. Julia, was your hand up a second ago?
Yes, it was. I tend to think as a person who can get really wrapped up in the, packing the bags and getting settled in and gathering everybody and making a plan and blah, blah, blah. To me, what altars can do is to remind us to stop and to move into the spiritual side. God said that you will be blessed, and to remember that, because if somebody says, what'd you do today? You might talk about all the things you accomplished, but not say, and I spent a little time at the altar. Whether that altar is actual or whether that altar is just a moment of silent prayer. But to me, it's a balancing thing. There's two sides to this story. God has said there's a blessing, and God said, pick up your stuff and your people and go to this land.
Right. Yeah, there's work to do. Abram didn't build an altar and just spend the rest of his life there. He still had to gather the stuff, pack up the bags, plan the route, get the food, avoid famine, all of that. And so the question ends up being, how do we do both? How effectively? Uh, how do we do both the kind of work that's necessary to sustain our souls, particularly when we have no real clue as to what we're doing or where we're going or maybe even where we are, and also do the work of moving forward, moving across that threshold or moving maybe deeper into it. So it's exactly what we find happening in this story. I want to take a moment now to tell you what the dictionary says about what an altar is. Here's what here's one way of understanding what an altar is. Noun, an elevated place or structure as a mound or platform at which religious rites are performed or on which sacrifices are offered to gods, ancestors, etc. Right here, this is a picture of an ancient Israelite altar that was probably used for burning incense, and that's also was true of ancient Israelite religions, and also true of religions today, where burning incense, burning sweet smelling substances, whether they be plants or resins from wood or what have you, is a way of offering something special to gods. But also notice it mentions ancestors, right? It's trying to be expansive for all the ways that people think about what it means to have and to use an altar. So this is a picture of probably an ancient incense altar. And then here's a picture of kind of a modern day Christian altar that was in someone's home. And we see there's some pictures of Jesus here, there's a rosary, we've got these beautiful candles and flowers, and a picture of maybe somebody's first communion, or maybe their baptism. And then a picture of somebody's feet down here with some pretty flower petals on those. And we have some statues around and whatnot. I think this is a picture of someone who is South Asian and is sort of has iconography both from Christianity and from some Hindu iconography as well. This to me looks like it might be an elephant, maybe Ganesha. And so what this person has done is bring together symbols, traditions, icons that have meaning to them. Here's another one. This is sort of a more new agey altar that has crystals, candles, some plants and rocks on wood and what have you. This thing back here looks like a little fountain that's pouring water. But it's again a space that has meaning and significance. Maybe for you, crystals are just pretty minerals, but for this person, they contain meaning in some kind of way. And then lastly,
Pastor,
yeah,
sorry. No.
No, go ahead, Fran. What were you thinking about?
I was thinking about the fact that you're presenting everything here, in a Christian or somewhat faith. But I remember as a child and growing up, if we saw someone with an altar, whatever, the first thing that would come to our mind, my mother's mind, voodooism.
Uh-huh. Sure.
So we sort of stayed away from that, And as I said, I would go to my hairdresser, and when I first went into her place of business and saw these altars, I was like, oh my God. Is this girl practicing something? You know, but people do think of altars, they could be either evil for good and or for bad.
And it's really true. I think particularly among Protestants, um, the idea of an altar has been kind of foreign and thought of maybe in some cases as
Yes.
either a Catholic practice or a practice of witchcraft, and it's been kind of shunned in some ways. I'll just say really quickly, this is a picture of a Day of the Dead altar.
Mm.
So there's all these pictures of this person that this family's celebrating, along with some of their favorite foods and maybe some of their favorite music and other symbols that just are pretty. We have the skulls down here. We have the Virgin of Guadalupe here. And so, what we find in this practice of building altars, whether we're talking about a mound of stones or we're talking about something big and ornate that has food and flowers and pictures and whatnot, is that altars end up being containers for meaning. They end up being avenues to experience transcendence, whether that's the transcendence from the mundane, the earthly, to the divine, or even the transcendence that happens when living folks connect with folks who have died. That's also a form of transcendence. And so, my suggestion to you then, kind of following up on some of what John and Julia were both talking about, is to think about how you might make space. Thinking about um, whatever kind of liminality, whatever kind of in between space you might find yourself in. How might you find space, whether it's literal physical space or it's internal spiritual practice space, to tend to your soul, to make a container that can hold meaning and offer you a way to transcend maybe the present and connecting with the future or the past, or to transcend the earthly reality that you are in and connecting with a divine reality that runs deeper, that connects with your soul. As I make that invitation, what comes up for y'all? Any particular responses? Does that
Yeah,
sound? Yeah, go ahead.
Tony, I'd like to say that when I was listening to you earlier talking about altars, I was thinking about my art space. It's a flat table. I do a lot of painting for the recovery community. Those of you that know John Kilzer and who he was, and he died 6 years ago, 5 years ago now. I put his music on. Sometimes I light a candle. Sometimes I burn incense. I have his music on and I sit there and I paint uh, the steps and give them to the recovery community at St. John's to give away each week. But that's kind of an altar for me. I'm thinking I have John's voice ringing in my head with his singing. I'm connecting with his soul, whatever the heck a soul is. And I think that I don't think I spend time thinking about my soul because I don't know what it is. You can't see it. It's not a heart. It's not a glass. It's not a computer. What is a soul? So you can't think about it, but whatever it is, I think my soul connects sometimes through his music and art and with the past and with the future. By these paintings, hopefully may do some good for some person that receives them, It's just a thought I had on my altar.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Nancy. And so you're kind of seeing your painting place as an altar in a
Right,
way. It's a
right.
place of connection and transcendence and meaning. Yeah, absolutely.
Are we,
Yeah,
are we?
No, I don't think so.
I will say that I fairly often ask the children about a space that they go to when that makes them feel calm or makes them feel safe. And not all, but many children have a place that they have selected. And sometimes it's in a closet. They go in their closet, or sometimes a tree or something, but many children have such a space.
yeah. And
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say there's something kind of at a very basic, intuitive level, human beings are drawn to such spaces where there can be a moment to center and calm and quiet and connect. Yeah, Fran, what were you thinking about?
It's not even about a space for me, Pastor, as much as it is about a person. And I just realized my soul, I pamper my soul when I go and get Kennedy and get in her space where it's of innocence, where it's of happiness. And I realize that when I'm with her, I am truly, bathing my soul in her innocence, as well as realizing that she is also my past, my present, and my future. I see my mother, my father in her. I realize that I also can see myself in her, and I also can see, hopefully, what it may be, in the future through this little innocence. Yes.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much for that, Fran.
Thank you.
I'll close today by naming, but really by repeating a couple of the definitions of a soul that we discussed earlier from Parker Palmer. He says the soul wants to keep us connected to the community in which we find life, for it understands that relationships are necessary if we are to thrive. The soul wants to tell us the truth about ourselves. The soul wants to give us life. And so my invitation to all of you is to think about where you can do that, where you can connect with community, with yourself, and with the energy that is life. And so with that, I want to thank you for taking this journey into ancient Israel with me. Next week, we're going to be talking about what it means to deepen discernment together in liminal space. So with that, I want to thank you again and hope you all have a beautiful day.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.